tools exist in the world, at least after today, you'll leave feeling like you know the bare basics. So when if someone says an Allen wrench, you know what they're talking about. Feel free to stop me at any point with questions, and at the end, I think we'll get to play around with the tools a bit, just so you can get your hands on them, or maybe we can hand them out as we're going through, just so you can get a feel for it all. All right, so we're gonna go kind of quickly, so just bear with me, and if you're not getting something, just yell out. So hammers, you're probably mostly familiar with, and down at that end, I guess maybe I'll leave this.
You can unplug it and move it.
Oh yeah, this is just power. This isn't. All right, so hammers. This is a mallet. This is a rubber mallet, and this is when you want to hit something, but you don't want to hit it too hard. This is for hitting like a piece of wood that you don't want to dent, or for if you're trying to assemble something, but you don't want to put a hole in it. You can use a mallet like this. You probably know what a more traditional hammer, like a metal hammer, looks like. It has the claw on the backside, so it's for hitting in nails mostly, and then for pulling those nails out with the claw. Wrenches, there's lots and lots of different kinds of wrenches. Here are a few kinds. This is an adjustable wrench, because it can adjust size to whatever size you want. These are called channel lock pliers technically, but they're still kind of like a wrench. And they just adjust size to get bigger and smaller. This is used a lot in plumbing. These are called vice grips. These are kind of like pliers or wrenches or something in between. And they're cool because they squeeze super hard. So if you're trying to really grip onto a bolt or something, then these are great for clamping down. And then to release it, you just push up this little lever here, and it pops open. These are needle nose pliers, so for getting into smaller spaces. And a lot of pliers have these little snippy bits at the bottom for cutting things. So that can be useful. If you happen to already be holding this, then you can cut that piece of wire instead of trying to find this, which is like a dedicated snipping plier, which is better. But if you don't already have it, then this is kind of convenient. These are a little sticky, but these are pliers that can adjust size. They can get bigger or smaller. So right now when I close it, the tips don't even come together. So it's for bigger sizes. And then in this mode, when I slide it over, it's for smaller sizes. That's most of this stuff. Yes?
Maybe show that those pliers have measurements on them normally, the ones that are with the adjustable.
Oh, sure.
And then get more just like how do you adjust the clamping pliers?
Oh, these guys, sure.
Yeah.
So an adjustable wrench, these happen to. It's kind of 50-50 whether they do or don't. And you probably can't see it, but on the side here, there's a little scale with an arrow on one side in inches and the other side in millimeters. So that let's say you're trying to turn a bolt and you're like, all right, this is not working well enough. I need to get a real dedicated wrench. And there might be a picture. Does it show up? This is like a real wrench. And so it has the full circle at the end in this shape, and it's just one size. So that's like a 15 millimeter wrench, and it's just that perfect size. This thing is like kind of sloppy, right? So if we're trying to turn it and it's slipping and it's not working well, we can be like, all right, that looks like 19 millimeters. Go to the toolbox, get the 19 millimeter wrench, and then really be able to do a better job.
Yeah.
So that's this. For the vice grips, they clamp down to a kind of particular size. And if you want to change that size, you can twist this. So let's say we were trying to grip these, like this clamp. We would close it and get it close by turning this. And then when we squeeze it, it's like on there. So that's a super strong grip. And then to release it, you squeeze it and it pops off.
Go get it downstairs.
Okie dokie. The next thing are utility knives. So it's a knife. You guys, there's different kinds. Actually, at MakeHaven, I think this is true. The number one thing that has sent MakeHaven members to the hospital are box knives, box cutters. So we have all these dangerous tools downstairs, and somehow, when someone's cutting something with a knife, you do it 100 times, and you get distracted, and then you need a whole bunch of stitches. So it is surprisingly, and we don't have a badge for it. Actually, it's been suggested that we do have a badge for it, but it's like, at some point, you just need to be careful. So yeah, just be mindful when you're using even a tool that doesn't seem that dangerous. They're really sharp, and they generally, utility knives use like brand new blades. They're crazy sharp, so they can cut easily. All different kinds of saws. So we're looking at hand tools right now, meaning tools that you power with your hands versus electric powered tools. So here's a bunch of different saws. This is like a general purpose saw. There are saws that cut when you push and saws that cut when you pull. So if you took this saw and you tried going like this while for cutting, it's just not going to do anything. So the way you can tell is by running your fingers over it. And I can feel that this isn't doing anything. I can do this all day long and I'm never going to cut through my fingers. But if you try to push, I can feel it grabbing. And that's how you know that this is a kind of saw. It's called a Western saw, because in the Western hemisphere, this is generally what we have. And it engages when you're pushing. So it's also called a push saw. In like Japan and other Asian countries, they have pull saws and they cut while you're pulling. We have some of those downstairs, and they're useful also. But for whatever reason, most of the Western world uses push saws. This is also a push saw. The blade in here cuts when it's pushing, not when it's pulling. But it's called a hack saw. I don't totally know why it's called that, but I guess for hacking things, and it's mostly for cutting metal. So in general, when you have things with smaller teeth, so you can see this as like super small little teeth, that means it's for cutting harder things. So if you go in the wood shop, the teeth on the tools are pretty big. And if you go in the metal shop, the teeth are often smaller. Because they're just taking off smaller bites, and if you're cutting through something hard, you just want to take a smaller bite at a time. You try to cut metal with this, you're taking off a huge bite, and it's just, you're not strong enough to do that. That's why metal cutting tools have these small little blades. It's called a hacksaw for cutting metal stuff. Metal goes through a range of hardness. So there's softer metals like aluminum or copper, and then harder things like steel, and then really hard steels. This can cut soft steel. If you tried to cut something like a hard steel, for example, like this thing, it won't work. It'll just, you can hear it's just skating over it. It's not going to touch it because this is just too hard. So for that, you need to use a different kind of tool. This is another kind of saw. This is called a back saw because it has this back on it, or spine. And that just means that it can't really bend so much. So it's nice for nice straight cuts. You can also use this miter box with it. Miter just means cutting at an angle. So we have a big miter saw downstairs, but this miter box lets you put a piece of wood in and then cut at a certain angle, like that. All right, boom, 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 saws. Next, tape measures.
I didn't bring a tape measure.
Tape measures. So tape measures.
I did bring this.
This is a laser, also cool.
Yeah.
A tape measure obviously is important for a lot of things. It's mostly used in woodworking when you're doing longer measurements. In the metal shop and other areas, we use sort of like smaller, more precise measuring things. And unfortunately, in the United States, we use the standard imperial system, which is super confusing, and there's a lot of fractions, and it's just kind of how it is. So sorry about that. Tape measure levels, cool. So like a level just tells you how perpendicular something is to the radius of the planet Earth underneath you. So it's not measuring how square something is or how straight it is, it's just how level it is. So if you're trying to make sure that this thing is level to the floor, that's not helpful because we don't know how level the floor is. But it will tell you if it's level to the earth. And so sometimes that's useful if you know that your floor is straight. Screwdrivers. All right, so there's lots of different kinds of screwdrivers. These are just the hand version. You can also get the version that goes in a drill for the electric version. But it's the same tips. So you can see all the different kinds of tips on the screen. The main ones are written out. So this is a flathead, pretty obvious because it's just flat. The next most common one in the United States is a Phillips. Exactly. Yeah, so there's 3 different sizes of Phillips. This is number 1, so it's a small little one. The most common one you'll see is a number 2, and then the big chunky one is a number 3. So that's for just turning bigger things, and you can put all those different sizes in here. There are lots of other shapes. So this is a Torx, and it's Torx is like this kind of shape, so it's like a star, and that's my favorite because it is really good at staying in there and twisting really strongly. There's Robertson, which is from Canada. It's a square shape, hex, all sorts of different shape sizes. So an Allen key is a type of shape that looks like this hex head, And use those all over the place. When you're making things, you'll run into those all the time. And so Allen keys have that hex head for turning hex heads. Pliers, we talked about most of the pliers, I think. Yeah, these are called slip joint pliers because they have this little joint in there that slips back and forth. Most people probably don't know that. Okay, we're gonna move over to some of the power tools. So recently, like over the past 10 years, our batteries have gotten a lot better. So now, like so many tools that used to only be corded, we have as battery powered tools, which is great a lot of the time. Some of them still aren't great yet. For example, I bought a battery powered nail gun for the wood shop to replace the air powered one. So in the powered tools world, there are 3 ways of powering the tools. One is with electricity, and that can either be through a battery or through a cord. And then the other one is with air. And a lot of shops will have just air all over the place and plug that air into their tool and use that to power. And we have a lot of those tools, but they tend to be really loud, so we try not to use them too much. They're great in like an industrial setting because they last forever. They have way fewer moving parts. They're way simpler. It's just blowing air over a fan, it spins the thing, and it makes it work. So in industrial worlds, they really like that. Here, we like batteries because it makes it really easy to move around. The nail gun that I got for the wood shop, being electric, made it like 4 times as big. So it's super hard to use. So actually, like being electric there is not as good a thing as I thought it was. So anyways, downstairs we have a lot of these tools. They're all yellow and black. They're made by DeWalt, and so that's just so they all have the same battery system. But that's how you can kind of tell. These are drills. And most people, when they think of a drill, think of this thing. The technical name for this one is a hammer drill / driver. So that means it does a bunch of things. And we're going to cover those quickly.
Next slide.
Oh, okay.
That next slide's just about that.
Oh, there we go.
Yep.
All right, so there's all sorts of things on here. So you can look on the screen or you can look here, whichever you want. The batteries come in and out. They have these buttons on here, so you can squeeze those to take them in and out when you need to charge it. Each battery on it has a little charge indicator. So we hold this and it says it's fully charged. The smaller batteries hold less charge. So, you know, if it's nicer to hold a light battery versus a big chunky one that can get your arm really tired, but it'll die more quickly. The top is the speed. So this is slow, and that's faster. Then there are 3 different modes that this thing can do. So there is this mode where you can see these numbers along the top. And that's what's called, that's for putting in fasteners. So let's say I'm just putting a screw into this desk, and this thing's really powerful. So if I just put it on full power and went for it, it could put a screw straight through it, which would not be what we wanted. So the clutch mode tells it to stop. Can anyone drive manual? Is that a thing people do? No. So like there's a clutch in manual cars, and that controls how much torque is getting put out. And so it's the same thing here. Is if you put this.
What's torque?
So torque is how much of a twisty power it's applying. So here, if we turn this to 1, which is the lowest, then when we put this in, let's say we're screwing into foam or something really soft, and we don't want it to plow right through it. When we twist, hear that sound? It's saying like, nope, that's all the torque I'm going to apply. And if we turn it up to more, now I have to hold on harder, and then all the way up, like, I can't hold on to that. Drill mode, it just goes for it. It gives it everything it's got to drill that hole. And then the last mode, this hammer mode, is it activates a hammer thing in here, and that's for drilling into stone or brick or cement, things like that. And it literally hammers. So you would put a special bit into it that has like a hard carbide, which is like a hard form of steel tip for smashing. To be honest, we have a tool downstairs that's dedicated to that task. It's a hammer drill, and it's way better. So you should use that if given the opportunity. The only other thing I think I didn't mention is this is forwards for when you want to put things in, and then backwards when you want to take things out. There's also light control on the bottom, but that's not important. All right. This is an impact driver. This has one job, and that's for putting fasteners in. So it's just for putting in screws, bolts, things that fasten things together. So it's like a more specialized version of this drill. I love it. I think it makes it so much easier to put in screws. So it's a great tool. The main difference is in here it has a hammer. So just like this thing has a hammer for drilling holes, this is a hammer for putting in screws. And that makes it so when you're twisting in a screw, this is just twisting. But this also, they're whacking with a hammer, and that gets it to go in much more quickly. They also have slightly different chucks. So the chuck is the way that you hold a bit in a drill. So in this hammer drill driver, so we're going to loosen the tip like this. That's how this chuck works. So if you're looking at it from the front, it's lefty-loosey. So you open it up, you put your bit in, more, put your bit in, and then tighten it. You can also put it in forwards mode and just hold it and tighten it like that. So now it's in. And that's great because you can do an infinite number of sizes of things can fit into here. But what they've done for the impact drivers is made it so that anything with this shank that has this little notch right in it will fit right into here. So you can just, it's in there now. And the reason that's important is because this is most often used for putting in screws. And if it was hammering while you're putting in a screw, it would jump right out, right? So that'd be super frustrating. So this, a little bit of slop in there, lets it hammer and bounce around so it doesn't jump out. And then to remove it, you just lift this collar like that, pops right up. We have speed on the bottom and forwards and backwards. That's all there's to it. All right, so I'm gonna touch on some of the things here. Let's say we just tried to drill a hole into, I don't know, this thing. It would just start spinning in circles, or that piece of wood. So it's important to be mindful of that. You're putting in a lot of power into that thing. It's gonna wanna spin if it can. So you're gonna need to use the clamps to hold it in place so it doesn't spin. Another general note is that when you're using a hand tool like a handsaw, you have a good sense of how much power you're putting in. Like it's your arm, you can feel what you're doing. When you start using power tools, you don't have a good sense anymore, right? Like I just pulled the trigger on this thing and it nearly took the skin off my finger because I just don't know how much power is going to come out when you pull the trigger. It's impossible to really know that. Which means you need to be very mindful when you're using power tools to do it a little more safely because you don't really know. You could just start to drill this thing and before you know it just swings around and breaks your hip. So it's important when using power tools, saws, drills, whatever, to be a little more mindful about the amount of power these things can have. All right, measurement layout. I already talked briefly about tape measures. This guy's a cool little laser thing, so you can just point it. Like battery's dead, but in general you can just point it and it'll measure the distance. These are calipers. So calipers are for measuring really precisely. So let's say you wanted, there are 3 ways to use calipers. So you can measure like this, see how big something is this way. You can measure holes to see how big something is this way. And then you can measure how deep something is from the bottom here. And then you can change whether you want millimeters, inches, or fractions on the top. It's very cool. There's a bunch of other kinds of squares. This is called a speed square. There's a combination square somewhere. There's all different kinds of measuring things. You can mark things. So you can use a pencil, obviously, but there's scribes. Other kinds of chalk markers. And it just depends on how precise you're trying to be. So if you're building a house, generally, they're working with 1/16 of an inch. They don't need it to be ultra precise. But if you're making a set of drawers, if it's a 1/16 of an inch too big, the drawer's not going to go in. So you need to be a little more precise. So you shouldn't use a Sharpie if you're making drawers. You should use a fine sharpened pencil. But if you're building a house, a Sharpie is just fine because it's okay if something's a 1/16 of an inch off. One of the lines in the fabrication world is measure twice, cut once. So you want to once you cut something, it's really hard to uncut it. So it's worth taking the time to measure to make sure it's the right size and then cutting it before wasting your time and material. Take your time. Here are some pictures of different kinds of tools. This is for metalworking and woodworking. I guess I've mostly been talking about wood stuff in my mind, but these are all different kinds of tools. So these are different kinds of calipers for measuring the outside of a thing. These are for measuring the inside of a thing. What else do we have here? There's center punches. So when you're drilling a hole in metal, that bit Like this bit is gonna just want to walk around. It's not gonna want to pick one spot and start drilling. So this center punch is used to put a little dent in the metal so it knows exactly where to start. Pencils, prick punch. I don't actually know what a prick punch is versus a center punch. Trammels just for making like circles. Yeah, you'll kind of learn them as they become relevant in your work. All different kinds of materials. Goes without saying, I think you're probably familiar with most of these. There's lots of different kinds of each of them. So there's 100,000 kinds of wood, so many different kinds of metals, plastics, fabric, cardboard, you name it. Each one has their own properties. And so it's important to learn, like, this one's strong, this one's brittle, this one is sewable. And it turns out a lot of things can kind of mix. And at MakeHaven, like, we have all the things right next to each other. So you can take a piece of wood and then, bring it to the metal shop and see how, like, what happens if you pour metal onto it. Like, there's things you can combine different materials in ways that you can't normally because we have all of the tools and materials here. So this is just different ways of holding the material. Like, most of the time, you're working on a small thing, and if you're trying to do something to it, it's gonna wanna move. So there's a lot of different ways of holding things down. These are squeeze clamps, because you just squeeze them. So you squeeze the handle, and they pinch, and then you squeeze this, and they open up. So if you wanna hold this guy, you just squeeze it, and you keep squeezing, it gets harder and harder until, like, it's on there pretty good. This is a C-clamp, so this is just a different kind. You can apply more pressure just because it's a solid chunk of steel. This is an edge banding clamp, so a lot of times you have to get creative with how to glue things together. So these tables actually don't have edge banding. Well, some of them do. So like here, no, none of them do actually. All right, well, imagine that there was a strip of wood on the edge of this, and you wanted to glue that on. It's kind of like, how do you glue that without like huge clamps or something? So this is a specialty clamp that goes on just like that, and this orange rubber band holds that edge strapping on there. So lots of clamps. Bench dogs. So if we go in the wood shop downstairs, you'll see that the tables have holes in them, and the holes are for this to drop through, and this holds the material onto the table while you're working on it. There are vices in the wood and metal shop for clamping onto things. This thing's called a bench dog, so this also goes in the same hole, just for pushing against. All right, next. Fastening techniques. All right, so there's cutting things apart, we covered that, and then there's putting things together. So there's a lot of different ways to put things together. One are bolts and nuts. So this is a bolt, and you may already know this, but bear with me, if you do. So bolts are dull on the tip, and they have threads for screwing into nuts. And you use that mostly with metal, but you can also use it with wood, and for squeezing two things or more together. Then we have screws, and there's a bunch of different kinds of screws here. They are pointy to drill into something, generally wood, and then they have threads and they pull things together like that. You can see it's not threaded up at the top because that's where your top piece of wood is going to be, and so the threads pull the two things together. These are sheet metal screws, and for sheet metal it's really thin, so the threads go all the way to the top, so that's how you can tell the difference between a wood screw and a metal screw. And I don't know if you can see, but this tip actually has a little drill bit built into it. So this is a self-drilling screw, and you can drill right into metal with it. You don't need to make a hole for it. It'll make its own hole. And then these are wood, yeah, we covered that, wood screws. Fastenings, there's glue. There's 300 kinds of glue that you can use to put things together depending on the material. There's a website called thistothat.org, and you can they have two big drop-down menus of all different materials. You can say, I want to glue glass to rubber, and it'll tell you which adhesive you can use. So that's useful if you're trying to figure out what to use. What else do we have here? Rivets. So if you look like at a plane or an old bridge, it's fastened with rivets, which is generally hot pieces of metal that have been squished. Hey.
How you doing, man? I don't want to interrupt them.
No, you're good. We're just talking about different fastening techniques. So what else? We have welding, brazing, and soldering. So that's if you have two pieces of metal and you want them to become one. So you are melting, you're putting in metal between them to hold these things together, and they're completely one. So if you wanted to break it, you have to tear it apart. Snap fit. So there's some pieces that you're probably familiar with, a lot of plastic things that just kind of like click together. There's no glue, there's no screws or nails, they just kind of click, and so that's a function of designing things so that they just bend the right amount, click together just right. There's all different kinds of nails, and like each of these, there's so many different kinds. Those are just a whole bunch of different kinds of nails. Like, who knew? Types of screws, we kind of covered that. Importance of safety. Well, so it goes without saying that like sitting at a desk at a computer, like relatively safe. You may be hard on your wrists and your eyes, but when you're in a shop, there are a lot more risks. And so by being in that space, you assume some of that risk and the responsibility of making sure you're using everything safely. There's a lot of different things that can hurt you in different ways, so it's important to just kind of be mindful of that. The big one that we push, you probably already know, is wearing safety glasses in the wood and metal shops. Our eyes are really delicate, and so it's just super easy to protect those from things that are flying, from dust, from whatever. So that's a really first easy one. Obviously, we have some other things in place. There's other personal protective equipment or PPE in the space that you can put on depending on what you're working on. Fire, we have sprinkler systems as well as fire extinguishers, different kinds around the space. A lot of different things, can hurt you. So whether it's chemical, if you're working with weird chemicals in some area, or electrical, not all the tools, but most of the tools run on pretty serious electricity. And so if someone accidentally cut through a power cord and then you touch that, on some of the tools, that's 480 volts. So that's that'll just light you on fire. That's a crazy amount of electricity. So it's important to be mindful of this is there's a lot going on in the shops, and it's definitely possible for someone to make a mistake, and you're working in a shared space with a lot of other people doing things. And so someone might not have cleaned up super well, or they might have left something sharp on the table. So you just kind of got to be mindful of that. And making sure you leave the space as safe as possible for the next person. So emergency contacts. A lot of the machines have guards on them to make them safer. So making sure that you are respectful of those. A big one is just being tired. A lot of times you're working on a deadline and it's 3 a.m. and you just want to get something done. And before you know it, you have a really bad cut because you just, were tired. So for me, when I can tell that I made my first mistake because I'm too tired, that's when I'm like, all right, it's time to call it for the night. It's not worth it. When if I'm working on the computer, obviously not such a big deal. But if I'm working in the wood shop and I can tell I just did something that was not very smart because I just was fading a little bit, you just gotta call it. And that can be important when you're on a deadline and you're feeling really stressed and trying to get something done. Conclusion, safety, top priority. We also have the buddy rule, which you probably are aware of. So there's some tools that could hurt you badly enough that you might not be able to help yourself. So for those, there needs to be someone who can see you when you're using those tools. So if you're coming at 3 a.m, it probably makes sense to bring someone who can keep an eye on you. And a lot of things that we covered. So making sure you're using tools like they're supposed to be used. Cleaning up is really, really important. This is a shared space with nearly 700 members. So this is only going to work if people do a really good job of cleaning up after themselves. Otherwise, it's going to be a pigsty in 5 minutes. Being slow and meticulous is good for safety and good so you only have to do your project once. I was just making something last week. There's a clamp for screen printing, for whatever, and I just was going too fast because I was excited, and I welded something at the wrong angle, and it's welded. So it is 100% permanent. I have to cut the thing to pieces now. And if I just had thought a little more, I would have put it at an angle, saved myself a bunch of time. So, you live and you learn. Bada bing, bada boom.
That's it. I think it'd be good for questions and for people to come up and see these things, maybe both at the same time.
Does anyone have any questions?
No.
Right. Yeah, do you want to come up and just kind of mess around with the drills and see if there's anything that you